Hello, everyone. I am so excited to speak with Leah Guy today on anxiety. And Leah is a new thought leader. She is the author of the Fearless Path book. And she's also authored 2 courses on Daily Om.
Revealing is healing. The more that we share and discuss and talk about and remove the shame from our experience, how we feel and who we are and where we've come from, then we have more just ground, like safe ground to explore and to be.
Yes, it's energetically feeling that security and safety. Mm-hmm. And I think when people are able to experience that energy for themselves and kind of have that sense of release, like I can really sink in and be present, that can really open up a space.
Yeah.
It's almost like shifting levels. It's like you can be at a level where, you feel like you're coping or you're treading and, you're kind of here, and then it's like, and then you can, if you're at another level, it's like a calm, it's just an overflowing sense of calm and abundance and allowing people, I think, in a sense, holding that space with them, allowing them to access that space.
Right. Yeah.
Gives them a new kind of place to tap into. Because I think, like you said, when we've experienced dysfunction, when we've had trauma, it's like that's the level that we're accustomed to. Mm-hmm. And we might not have that example of what a healthy experience or a healthy system or healthy relationships might be like. And I think that can also be a core issue, is even our relationships, and that our relationships can also cause us anxiety. Is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, I think relationships cause people anxiety, but I think that, below that is like this core sense of self, and if a person is struggling with insecurities or shame or the energy of not being enough or good enough or lovable enough, or fear around vulnerability or intimacy, guilt, there's so many different things that are going on underneath that they're carrying and projecting into the relationship, and then therefore it gets mirrored back to them, so yeah, I think relationships can certainly cause anxiety, but unfortunately so many people are fixated on the other person, more so than themselves, and any relationship will shift and change and transform as we do our work and transform as well, so that part's unavoidable, but a lot of people are fixated on the other.
So it's really about learning how to develop the internal relationship, the one that you have with yourself, and noticing when you are in relationships that are causing a level of stress and anxiety, as a way to also self-reflect and maybe see what changes you can make internally and externally, to shift that for yourself. What about environments that carry a lot of stress and energy? Some people talk about having anxiety when they go to a shopping center, where they're at a big sporting event, and that triggering their anxiety.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of situations, driving on freeways, crowded malls, there's so many different scenarios. And again, if we feel ungrounded, untethered, unbalanced, not centered in our core, not feeling confident, all those kinds of things, then any of that will disturb a person. I talk, a lot about the root chakra. Many people, especially people seeking spiritual growth and meditation and enlightenment and that kind of thing, are very focused on the higher chakra centers, if you will, and clearing the mind and doing all that. But it's really the root chakra where things need to start, where we can pull so many resources from and where we have that stability. So I often give the example of, like, if I'm standing firm with 2 feet planted and feel solid and whole and affixed to myself where I am, if a big wind hits me it's going to do very little to me. I mean, I'll move with the wind as I should. But if I'm ungrounded and untethered and feel unsafe and haven't balanced myself and don't feel confident and don't know who I am and haven't done any self work, then it's akin to being like on a big toe, you know, standing there on a toe and trying to function from that place. And then when we get in the crowds or a big wind comes or an upsetting conversation or what have you, it's going to toss us over to the side and we don't have stability. And so that element of being very anchored in our lives and within ourselves so that we can navigate it's huge. You know? But I think overall, you know, the bigger piece is really understanding that anxiety is a symptom and what is it covering? You know, what is it trying to teach us? Because it's not there, you know, it's not there to harm us. It's trying to teach us. And, you know, I think fear is our biggest teacher. And when those fears come up, whether it's in the middle of the night, when you're by yourself, whether it's about losing a relationship, a loved one, whether it's about going to the crowded mall, whether it's about whatever it is, you know, what is that really trying to teach us? And it's not just, I don't like crowded places, you know, there's something deeper going on there. And it's tied to, you know, our old patterns and some of our old wounds. So I think ongoing, then that's the kind of mission, you know. And then when we can touchstone with that, it's not that we obsess over that, but we learn skills of how to be authentic, how to, you know, reparent our inner child, how to, you know, be present, how to, you know, be active in our life of self-care as opposed to being outside of ourselves and, you know, feeling off center with stuff that's happening around us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Leah. It is something to look at more deeply, rather than just the surface experience of anxiety, and that's causing me anxiety. And it's an opportunity to go deeper within,
Yeah.
to look at what's happening beneath the surface. What do you think about the way they're treating anxiety right now? I know that this is just for informative, like your perspective, but the way the medical industry treats anxiety through antidepressants. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think at large, it's made people think that something's wrong with them, you know, like they
Mhm.
have a condition. And I think there are some people, I don't think it's the majority of people, but I think some people that have a chemical imbalance that can be kind of prone to it. A lot of people think they've inherited it from their, you know, genetics and so forth. But they're seeing, you know, people are seeing it like a disease now. And I do think mental health is a condition that we need to attend to. But the amount of, I'm not a huge fan of just, it's, you know, prescribing drugs for everything such as anxiety. You know, but again, it's hard to say, I guess, at large because everyone's so different and unique of what their background story is and what their emotional experiences and their stability and so forth. But I'm not opposed to using help when we need, you know, if there's a crisis or getting through something like that. I think that pharmaceuticals can be helpful in certain instances, but people have just kind of equated this, you know, something's wrong with me and I take this pill and then I'll be better.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that that's, you know, I don't think that that's a good path to healing
Mm-hmm.
myself.
And do you think that it would be really helpful for people if they went through something traumatic or incredibly stressful, that they start to receive help or healing right away through that process, to maybe so that they don't carry that anxiety forward?
Yeah, you mean
For
through the process?
example, cases like PTSD.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Mhm.
Um, I think, you know, like with PTSD in particular, um, you know, I think the people that are specializing in treatment of PTSD in the, I guess, Eastern or Western world, sorry, you know, are coming around to this idea of learning and teaching how to accept and embrace and sit with the feeling and, you know, be with it instead of trying to distance themselves from it. And
Mhm.
that's been a very effective approach for a lot of people with PTSD. Um,
Yes. Mhm.
yeah. So you
I don't
have to
think
be
people really
there.
think about that too much, do they? When they go through, they had a major accident or major experience. It seems like that's not really top of mind for people, if they've gotten a major injury or they've been hurt, to in that moment, you know, at that time, start receiving that support and that help so that later you don't have this effect of anxiety or PTSD.
Yeah.
It's just something I think is, you know, it seems like a luxury to some people, or they don't really think about it, or they don't think that they need help and that
Hmm.
they can just get through it. And then they've got a shifted nervous system, and now, you know, it's feeling really fragmented for them and frenetic. So I think there's nothing wrong with receiving that help and support, and that can also be a source of recognizing, you know, when I might need support and healing, because it's kind of a surreal out of body experience that you have when you go through something strong and traumatic.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And, a lot of people don't even recognize for a year or more of the trauma and the experience. It takes a while to process all that. So I think as soon as someone has the awareness, to get support for sure. I think everyone can use support though. I don't think that there's anyone that is a void. In my book, I talk about post-traumatic emotional disorder, PTED. So
Oh,
it's we all have an emotional disorder of some sort. I don't care who you
oh,
are. I don't
tell us
care.
more about PTED.
Yeah. Uh, well, it's PTED. It sounds strange for some reason right now saying it. Well, it's the idea that from our childhoods and from us coming from people who've had their traumas and wounds and so forth, we've all experienced a certain level of being hurt and shamed and abused and treated poorly or what have you. The combination's always different. And so I think as kind of people are waking up to this idea of self-care and healing and higher consciousness and so forth, we're kind of, waking up to that as well, which is I can have compassion for my ancestors from which I came, but now I have to, I have the opportunity to attend to this. Whereas 50 years ago or 80 years ago, they weren't attending to this kind of thing. It was just the way things were. It's just the way our family
Been
was.
20 years
You know,
ago, right? It's been really
yeah,
recent, it seems. Oh,
yeah,
keep going.
yeah. So by and large, even a healthy person has a lingering emotional disorder of some sort, and I mean, I've worked with multimillionaire, top of, the company, people who seem to have it all together, mothers who are just fantastic mothers and mothering 5 children and doing all the side jobs. And, it's just like, you think, wow, these people are healthy and happy and strong. But every one of us has that silent inner critic, that voice. And even when you mentioned a minute ago about like being injured, I can't tell you how many people that I've worked with that have gotten injured or something, out of the blue has happened to them, and they internalize it into that voice of, why did this happen to me? What is wrong with me? Why aren't other people experiencing that? Did I do something wrong? Am I not worthy of health or happiness, or just to get through this life scot-free? We internalize it, and we're internalizing it because it threads back to that, the PTED, which is a part of us where our core wounds are, that feels either we don't belong here, we're not good enough, we're not lovable enough, we're not valued in the same kind of way. And that's just, it's really something for people in their psyches and their emotional bodies to work through.
Yes. So everybody can receive support. Everybody can benefit from receiving support. And
Yeah.
what about people that feel that they don't have very much resource or money to put towards their health and their healing? What's something that they could possibly do to resource themselves?
Well, and I don't say this like I'm not promoting, and I'm not a 12-stepper, but there's a lot. I say I'm not a 12-stepper. However, I've been to a lot of the 12-step meetings because of this very thing. There's a lot of free support in those kinds of meetings, whether they're codependence, anonymous meetings, Al-Anon, ACOA, whatever the breath that you're looking at, grief support groups that aren't really of the 12 step, but they're a similar structure. There's a lot of group support out there that can be very helpful. It's not individual based, but just going and being amongst like-minded or other people who have experienced trauma and are willing to be vulnerable enough to sit in a space together and share can be very, very helpful and healing for people. So I think if someone doesn't have financial resources, that's a wonderful way to go. I think online, just like the courses I offer, my courses are $15 on Daily Om. The one on my website's $20. It's like most of us have $15 or so, and to invest in a few weeks of a course. The online world has made that very accessible, which is a beautiful thing. Of course, you have to kind of, sniff around and make sure that you resonate with the courses that are out there. But there's so many free webinars and healers and people, in most areas, or at least online now. And if they're not, church organizations, grief organizations, 12-step programs, all of that, go there. Most of those people have their heart in the right place. They may not have all the answers, but at least being in an environment where you feel like, you can just be and share and not be judged and commune is very, very healing.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's also part of why people experience anxiety, is from isolation and feeling very alone? That we don't have the sense of tribe and community or support, like you mentioned, because it's so easy to just be in your own world with it, when you have anxiety.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think it's interesting because there's a lot of people that have that experience of like, I'm all alone in the world, and then they kind of isolate more because they don't want to have anxiety out in the world or have a panic attack, and they start limiting their functioning. And then there's other people, I'm in the New York City.
Can you expound on that, limiting functioning?
Well, like they'll start making choices to limit how they function and what they do and who they communicate with and where they go.
So it becomes very controlled.
Yeah. So they very much try to control their environment, which only makes the energy of anxiety more prevalent, because now that is winning, and that becomes the bigger energy in the space or in the field. But there's a lot of people, like I was saying, I'm in New York area, in New York City. I can't tell you how many people are sitting in their offices with, hundreds of people around, and going out after work, and, going to the busy clubs or bars or shopping markets or whatever. And they're filled with anxiety. And one would think, well, you have support, or you have people around
you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a community of sorts, but it's in that environment, it's not touching their emotional core, they're kind of separate from that part of themselves in those environments. So I think it's challenging just in general. I do think it's challenging. I don't know if there's one perfect kind of neighborhood or community. I know that essence and that sense of tribe and community is very healthy for people. If it's a healthy tribe or community,
Yeah.
And then we go into like family dynamic, people go home to their family for that purpose. And then if that situation isn't healthy, then it just adds to the whole.
What is that link between anxiety and stress? What's the distinction, would you say, between those two?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that stress is kind of I think stress kind of is read more from our internal operating system, like our adrenals and our how we've learned to function and tolerate so much pressure, where anxiety is kind of like this internal combustion of, where we feel out of control. And I don't know if it necessarily feels like pressure, but it definitely feels, I think I would say for most people, and for myself, when I had it, it felt like something was at me, like something I couldn't control, and that made me afraid of it, and it became this thing instead of a feeling. It became a thing. It's like, that's, I said earlier, people say I have anxiety, like I have something, I have.
Yes, they kind of talk about it almost like a force of energy or an
Right,
actual presence of energy coming
right,
at them.
right. And if we could even
How do
switch
you?
back, well,
Mhm.
even to switch it to feel, you know, to say, if we could say, I'm feeling anxious right now. Right now, I'm feeling anxious. You know, now I'm giving it a, a space and a time and a characteristic of how I'm feeling. And it's kind of more controlled within me. And I can, if I could say that, that I'm acknowledging and I'm accepting what is real for me right now, which is I am feeling anxious right now, as opposed to I have anxiety. And then it's like crippling my whole world. It's dominating my whole system, you know? And if I have anxiety right now, that tells the inner self and our nervous system and the subconscious mind that perhaps in a moment we can allow that to pass, or something else might present itself, you know, and just be with that right now. And then how do we feel right now? And then keep treading that. And now we're into the present moment. We're into our body center. We're into our emotional body. We're into the experience of it. And you throw in some movement with that. And now you have kind of control over it instead of it controlling everything about you. So even some, you know, simple wording can help.
Mhm. And you did talk about the movement before. What
Yeah.
kind of movements do you suggest to people?
Well, so I like the alternate nostril breathing and different breath work as far as just breathing techniques. But it sounds really silly, I suppose. But I like to do this very simple thing where if I'm feeling anxious in the moment, I will stand up and put my arms over my head and, you know, lean back and just whoosh forward and move
Yeah,
that air out, move my energy down, move my body, bend my body, let everything expel from my body, and just do that. Or, like I said, even just standing in place and jumping up and down, you know, and start to get the blood moving and the breath flowing through the body and feeling the bottom of your feet, feeling the floor. Or actually just doing something else, not as a distraction mechanism totally, but it is a distraction, but just, you know, taking action to do something, pick up a book and, you know, concentrate on 5 words. Like all these things can break the energy cycle, like emotional freedom technique, you know, it's like how we're breaking through the energy cycle of the pattern of that anxious belief, that anxious feeling that our body knows, and we cut into that. And it's not to say like no more anxiety forever, it's to be with it and to redirect it, you
like
know.
disrupt the pattern of
Yeah,
anxiety, kind of being trapped in the system, like
yeah,
a combustion that you're talking about, moving the energy
yeah,
by moving your body.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm.
Sometimes, like, even if you don't know the tapping technique, just tapping on your body, pinching your body, you know, getting into your senses, just, you know, noticing what you hear, noticing what you taste, touching yourself, like all these things
Massage,
really,
self massage. That's really good. Hmm.
yeah, get you back in your body. Yeah.
Hmm.
A lot of
So it's
people
really
that
about
have
getting
anxiety,
grounded in your body and kind of out of your head, or in the space or that feeling of
yeah,
compression or pressure.
right.
So
And then when
yeah,
that
this is all
passes,
really helpful.
yeah, thank you. Good.
What did you want to say? I'm sorry,
Oh, I
Leah.
was just going to say, like, once the anxiety passes, the most important part is to revisit it when we're not in the anxious state, so that we can take a look at what's underneath there. You know, what was underneath that feeling. You
Mhm.
know.
How would you approach that when you say revisit it? I know people kind of like those like actual steps that you might go through. How would you approach revisiting an anxious state?
Well, I think, you know, if you can track your thoughts or the feelings that you had before that came on, um, that can be very helpful. Like I wrote about this somewhere. Sometimes I forget where I wrote about things, but I remember the last time I actually started to have a panic attack. It was several years ago, and I knew I wasn't going to have a full panic attack because I just haven't had one in so long. But it was a similar feeling. I was like, "Wow, this is a strong, anxious feeling." And I was laying on my bed, and, you know, by all intents and purposes, nothing was going on. And I worked through it by doing the same things I'm saying to you right now. And then after I got out of that feeling, I, went and got tea or something and kind of just sat for a minute. And I thought about what I was thinking about or feeling before that came on. And I got this way about my grandmother who'd passed. And so I realized that there was some grief that was trying to come up because I hadn't given enough time for my grief over my grandmother passing, swept away in work or whatever. And then when I recognized that it was actually grief in there, and then I could name and say, wow, I have some unprocessed grief. And then here comes the well of emotion and that's what was the anxiety, was like holding down this deeper feeling of grief that wanted to emerge. And so then I sat with it and I let it, come out, crying and writing and praying, all the things. And so that was just kind of a clear example, I suppose. Sometimes people are thinking about work, but then what does work mean? Are they feeling financially unstable? Are they unhappy with their job? It can take them back to why they took the job in the first place. Are they in the kind of line of work that they want to do? Did they not feel good enough about saying no to this job and saying yes to the other job? Should they have moved to, Florida when they had the chance? It's like this whole connection of thought and feeling. And when it hasn't been processed through, the anxiety shows up and just kind of, the volcano starts
It's
coming.
almost like a lid of energy that kind of keeps it in place. And it's interesting you talk about this, Leah, because I also share the same, I'm of the same sentiment of you, is that it has a lot to do with unprocessed emotions and emotional healing and allowing yourself to actually feel. And I think we don't look at anxiety that way. We just say, I have anxiety, or that gives me anxiety, and this triggers my anxiety. And we don't see it as what's the conflicts, the unresolved conflict and emotion that's there, which I think is really scary for people to really go into by themselves or on their own. So it's, what would you suggest? Just a simple practice to start embracing and really looking at their feelings, what's coming to them. Mm-hmm.
I really do like journal writing a lot. I know a lot of people talk about it, but it's, just a free form, unfiltered kind of just letting everything out and on paper or in
I'm a huge fan too. Yes.
Yeah. Or a voice recorder too, just starting to move some of that thought and energy through. I think that that's important, screaming in your car, crying into the pillow, writing it all out. The trouble with writing and the beauty of writing is that we have this, idea that we want to write well, or what if somebody reads it, or who's going to judge me, or what if, this sounds ridiculous, or what have you. If you can remove all those filters and just let every word and thought and feeling down, it's very cathartic. It's very, helpful to release some of that buildup. And you asked about stress earlier, and I just quickly wanted to say, I think stress can turn into anxiety. Like a lot of these people,
chronic stress, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, chronic stress. But then we have to ask ourselves, why are we allowing that kind of stress? It always comes back to our empowerment somehow, and us allowing this kind of stress because why? We don't want to not be accepted. We don't want to be fired. We don't want to, whatever the reasons are. And so we allow this kind of stress when we really have a lot more control over the stress. So if that goes on too long, then that can turn into anxiety. And then we have to kind of look at, how and why we're living. And unfortunately, it takes people all that to get to the point where they want to change and do something about it, but not always.
Well, also what I often see too is that it's normalized for people. So they kind of live in this dampened, subdued, repressed or depressed state. And yet you know, and they kind of look around and they don't really know how to get themselves out of it or move to another level or shift it, um, because they're just used to feeling that way. And I think you can get used to toxic emotions, and you know, you can run those chemicals and energy through yourself over and over again, that it just is your new normal. And I think a lot of people are coping with this right now, this kind of normalized, like lower energy vibration. And it's just, you know, how do we invite people or open these conversations and talk about it in new ways, to open people up to a new space within themselves. And like you said, it's because they don't want to deal with negative consequences of having to resolve their inner conflicts or their true emotion, what they truly emotionally feel connected to, and maybe like the stress of having to deal with some of those consequences.
Yeah.
So, mhm.
Well, in my course, the Overcoming Toxic Emotions course, I talk a lot about all of this, which is how we identify ourselves, and in the identification of what we want of ourselves and the identification of our reality. And it's very revealing for people to go through this process of the course. And then also to understand more deeply about these emotional, energetic imprints, the patterns, the imprints that we have. Because I agree there, it becomes a normal. I don't know that it's a new normal though. I think that they're actually magnetizing back to that imprinted state of,
Okay.
low
Mhm.
vibration, low feeling, because that's their comfort zone. Doesn't mean that they like it, but that's what's comfortable,
It's a comfort
And
zone.
yeah, so we have
Okay.
to learn how to break, like separate ourselves enough so that we can be witness to that, what is, and then start very slowly and systematically and methodically almost reestablishing new energy imprints. And that's where the energy work helps so much. But we're doing it also in conjunction with our mind and with our feelings, attending to those imprints and saying, yes, this is me. This is, although I'm embarrassed to admit it, or it doesn't feel good to admit it, this is my comfort, and it's not my fault, but I'm the only one that can change that now. I'm the only one that can shift those imprints and create new energy patterns and new connections within myself. So yes, it's not, I don't want to say it's hard, but it is, you have to
It takes
be,
effort
yes, you
and
have to be
energy to
willing.
look at it.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, but it's very doable.
Hmm. Thank you so much, Leah. Is there anything else you'd like to add or say
I
before we
don't think so.
close today?
Thank you for having me with you.
Oh, you're welcome. Our pleasure. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your time with us. And again, if you'd like to check out Leah's work, she has written the Fearless Path book, and she has 2 courses on Daily Om. So you can find Leah Guy on Daily Om as well. Leah, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.